You're about to hear an original HFY sci-fi tale titled "A Hunter Like That Deserves to Pass on His Genes," said the alien huntress in awe. Find a quiet spot, put on your headphones, and let the stars fall silent. If you enjoy cinematic sci-fi narrations, consider subscribing for more. Now we begin. The storm over Kestrel Roman 4 did not fall from the sky. It crawled up from the ground like something alive. Dust rose in sheets that glowed red under twin suns, each grain electrified by the static charge that licked at broken towers and the ribs of dead machines. Lightning stitched horizon to horizon. The air itself tasted of iron and storm fire. Mason Hale moved through it like a man wading through a memory. He kept to the shade where the skeletal frames of pre-war windmills bit at the sky, moving in a deliberate rhythm. Step, plant, scan, breathe. The plasma burn on his thigh had cooled into a throbbing iron band, and dried blood had inked a black map on his armor. His visor was a spiderweb of cracks that caught the lightning and turned it into jagged stars. He had 3 knives, a coil of line, a flare, 1 micro-grenade, a half-dead rifle with 7 good rounds and 1 he didn't trust. And he had 40 kilometers of ruin between himself and extraction. He had something else too. He had the Zir. They were in the storm with him, riding it like sharks, always just beyond the edge of vision, clicking to each other over the wind. He could feel their presence in the way the dust turned cold against his skin, in the way his heartbeat sharpened when the air pressure fell. The Zir were hunters born, their civilization carved in the shapes of teeth and tracks. Everything about them made sense only when you imagined that, long before ships and steel. They had learned to become perfect at following the trail of one terrified animal through a world of other animals. Humanity had learned that too. Not in the same way, maybe. Not with the same bones. But the lesson was written in their marrow. If something hunts you, you turn and become the thing that hunts it. Mason paused beside the wreckage of a calm mast and crouched. The wind pressed flat against the plates of his armor, finding the seams, whispering. He looked up a ladder whose rungs had been melted by old fire and saw the dish half torn away, hanging at an angle that made his knees ache just to look at it. High ground was good. High ground meant air and sight lines and a little space to bleed where nobody could come up behind you without announcing themselves with a rain of bolts. He climbed. The first rung held. The second creaked like an old man's spine. By the 6th, his legs shook and sent a flare of pain up his back. He told it calmly, without the heat of anger, to do its job anyway. Think slow, move slow, breathe slow. On the dish, he lay on his belly and put the cracked scope to his eye and let the storm roll around him. They were there, 5 of them. He'd known there were 5, but knowing in your head and seeing in the world were 2 different kinds of knowledge. They were spread out, drifting through the ruins with a patience that was almost gentle, heads low, blades at rest. Huntresses, smaller than Zir males, but their smallness was the shape of speed. Armor fitted to their bodies like poured shadow. Spears that hummed softly when they moved, drinking the background static like vines drank water. He took a breath, then another, and let the sight wander with the closest of them. Her mask had a crest like a serrated fin, and red marks along the jaw in the Zir script that meant vow and not yet and waiting. He'd seen that pattern in a briefing packet once, wedged between a casualty list and a map of supply lines. Huntresses who swore not to couple until they found prey that genuinely threatened them. Not just any prey, worthy prey, an equal. The thought came and went like a fish under black water. Mason centered the reticle on the soft place where neck met shoulder and squeezed. The rifle bucked. The round slammed, angled, entered. The huntress lurched and folded without a sound. The other 4 didn't panic. Panic was a human luxury, and even humans learned to go without it. They fanned out in a rake, as if harvesting, and the line of their movement drove an invisible wedge toward the base of the tower. A bolt of blue-white lanced out and cut a brace in half. The whole structure shivered. Mason worked the action, fired again, and missed. the shot carving a smoking gash across a shoulder plate. He shifted right as return fire turned the dish into a hot drumhead metal singing. A plasma bolt hissed an inch from his cheek and took a fingernail of paint off his visor, and the smell of it was sweet and wrong. He rolled, dropped the spent mag, slammed home his last full one. The ladder below him shook. Someone was climbing fast. He crawled crabwise to the lip of the dish, hooked his line to a stanchion, and pulled the pin on his micro-grenade with his teeth. He counted the beats of his heart, 1, 2, 3, and let it fall. The blast was a flat slap. Heat hit him in a wave and rolled away down the bones of the tower. He pivoted, sighted, fired twice into the shadow that still moved below the dish. Silence. For a moment there was only the storm again and the ringing of metal. Then a spear whispered up past his head and buried its point in the dish, crackling. He rolled left, felt the numb punch of a glancing strike across his shoulder. He came up crouched with the knife in his right hand without remembering drawing it, and the huntress that had thrown the spear was there with her left blade low and her right high, mask angling as if to scent him. They looked at each other. The storm wound itself tighter around the dish. Lightning knitted a white stitch across the distance and left them for an extra heartbeat in shadow. She moved first. Of course she did. Speed was her truth. The right blade swept like a moon. Mason went under it and inside it, using violence like a door, and he let her expect a stab and instead used his shoulder and the weight of the dish to drive her sideways. She was light and strong, like a steel bow. In the same motion she turned and let the bow of herself bend and rebound and almost took his throat. He felt the kiss of it along his jaw. Felt his own knife go in, up, twist, come out hot. She went to one knee with a sound like someone swallowing a scream. "You fight with pain," she said, her voice raw through the translator that had half fried itself weeks ago. Not contempt, not pity, wonder. "You bleed and you stand." Mason said nothing. Words were weight and he had none to spare. She tipped her mask as if tasting the air, as if the act of seeing him demanded a better angle. A hunter like that, the translator stuttered, then caught up. Deserves to pass on his genes. It was the strangest benediction he had ever been given. It didn't belong in that place, on that day in that mouth. But it was true in the way a story can be true even when it is a joke or a prayer. He did not kill her. He didn't have to. She tipped backward in a manner that was graceful even as it was clumsy and slid off the dish. She struck the framework below with a sound that was almost delicate, and then there was no more of her. The other three were coming up the far side like a tide. Mason fired until the rifle clicked dry, then used it as a club, then let it go. They drove him back to the lip. He had nowhere to go but down, so he went down, but on purpose. He kicked the spear loose from the dish, looped the line around it, jammed the haft across the gap in the frame like a windlass, and dropped. The line hissed through his gloves and burned the place between thumb and forefinger. He fell past broken braces and hangers, past the blown-out skeleton of the maintenance cage, and kicked off at just the right second to make the line swing, tambouring him toward a pile of dead conduit. He hit and rolled, and the world went hot white for a second, and then decided out of a strange generosity to let him keep being in it. He crawled under the conduit. The huntresses came down swift and clean and silent and searched, but they did not crawl because crawling is not hunting, and sometimes you must be hunted to remember how to crawl. Mason moved like a stone rolling downhill 1 inch at a time. He found a grate with slack bolts. He found a tunnel with a mouth like a throat. He found the dark. He slept. Not long, not well, just enough for the body to take its quiet inventory and redraft whatever contracts it had with pain. When he woke, he wasn't better, but he was back. He drank from the pouch that had taken on the taste of the suit liner, ate a bar that had been crushed into gravel, peed into a rag because the storm wanted to smell it, and taped the rag to a bit of conduit, and threw it out another vent as far from his own line as he could. He thought about the huntress and the things she said, and he put it away in that room inside him that kept anything that wasn't directly useful today. The tunnel took him not outward but downward into the wrong kind of quiet. It was a buried access to old comms and backup generators. When he touched the walls, the static in his fingers popped like tiny bones. He moved with a hand on the wall and his head low. He passed a human skeleton curled around a smaller one and didn't look long because looking is a luxury you pay for later. Under the dead comms hub was an echo chamber where the war had come and gone and left questions the way oceans leave shells. Here there were Zir bones and human bones, and things that had never had bones but knew how to cut you anyway. Here, the air was so still that breathing sounded like a threat. He moved as if the air were part of him and not the other way around. When the tunnel climbed again, he followed it to a mouth full of torn metal and old soot, and watched the storm drag scarves of dust past like pale rivers. Far off, something squared off against the horizon in a way that horizons do not do on their own. He listened. Listening is not hearing. Hearing is what ears do. Listening is what hunters do. The squared shape had a rhythm. The rhythm said ship in a language he knew down past muscle. He counted it out. Time is a tool. Hunters use tools. Back through the tunnel, left up through a hatch that protested and then relented. And he was in a facility that the world had decided was no longer anything, but it had once been something, and in the backs of its old rooms he found the ghost of a drone bay. One drone intact enough to be a bomb if you loved it right. He loved it. He gave it a core. He improvised a trigger that wasn't smart but was faithful. He told it a little lie about what it was and asked it to keep the lie until it died. He lit the fuse, not with a match but with the part of his brain that says, listen, the window is small, jump now. He went out into the storm again and walked into the shape of the Zir dropship as if yesterday had never happened. It should have burned him out of the storm like a god. It didn't. It was busy. It was pleased with itself. It had trophies. It had Captain Alina Voss. They had scuffed her when they took her, but they had not broken her. Some enemies break you to fit you into the story they understand. The Zir don't. They leave you in your shape and see if you will bite them. Her wrists were cuffed to a spar by the ramp. A Zir male, big and beautiful like a statue made by a culture that worships knives, stood over her and watched the storm hit his armor and slide off it like rain off oil. Mason did not make a plan. He did not do that because he did not have the pain-free seconds necessary to draw a plan in the air, and no plan survives the enemy's first sentence anyway. He walked until the warlord looked up, and then he let the drone fall at his feet, and he smiled in a way that involved too many teeth. The warlord tilted his head. Another prey. Mason tried to answer and taste blood. The blood tasted like metal and the storm. Boom, he said, because some truths are best said small. The white came and the sound went and time did what time does when something changes everything inside of one breath. It became water. It carried him away and then back. When it came back, it brought him a sky full of black smoke and a ground that was a field of sharp glitter and a ramp that was now a jagged mouth and Captain Voss crawling toward him with cuffs melted away from her wrists. You should be dead, she said, because truth is a coin you spend even when you're poor. I feel like I am, he said, because jokes are armor. Can you stand? He could. He did. He made his body a fact. He dragged her to the lee of a rent in the hull and they sat with their backs together like old friends who had never spoken. The warlord had become parts. Those parts were scattered over a geography that used to be a clearing. The huntresses were shadows in flames. The storm had been pushed back for a moment by the sheer rudeness of an explosion done right, and in that quiet came another sound with edges you could trust. Human engines. The valiant dawn. No more running. They took him and he slept, and the sleep went deep and black and full of edges you can pull yourself up on. When he woke, he was inside an antiseptic hum and under a light that thought about kindness and decided on honesty. Voss sat beside him with one arm bound up like a victory. Command wants to hear how you did it, she said. Badly, he said. With luck, with maybe more stubborn than sense. She studied him. Voss had an officer's face, which is to say she had learned how to make a room of other people braver just by standing up in it. But now there was a second face under hers, the face of a hunter looking across a fire at another hunter and weighing the words for the story. The huntress you fought up there, she said. We found her. The marks on her were a vow. I saw them, he said. She told you something. She said I fought with pain. And then she said, he swallowed, it had been an odd mercy. She said a hunter like that deserves to pass on his genes. Voss's mouth twitched in a line that was not a smile and not a frown. Among the Zir, that isn't just admiration, it's acknowledgement, it's permission to live. You need permission, Mason said, and now there was a smile because you earned them where you could. Voss looked out the viewport. The stars moved like a slow river and the bright fish among them were human ships. We're not running anymore, she said. We're going to bite back, supply raids first, disrupt the hunts, make them hunt us on our ground. Where's our ground? Mason asked. Anywhere we stand, she said, and there was the officer again. The valiant dawn became a blade used in the proper direction. Cutting lines, cutting nets, cutting old stories, it struck at Zir feeding lanes and skirmish cradles and ritual hunting grounds turned strategic. It didn't do that alone. Fleets are families, and families are fleets, and humanity had made a lot of ships out of old sorrow and fresh rage. But the dawn got where it needed to on time and left a mark when it did. And sometimes the thing that matters most is not missing the moment when the world offers you a lever. Mason heeled crooked. The leg would always remind him of the day it closed over too much heat. The shoulder would complain in the rain. If there was rain, if humanity found a world to call its own a while. He learned the names of the medtechs who strapped a stretch of silver muscle over bone and asked him to trust it. He learned the habits of the captain who asked him to rest and the man who didn't know how. He learned to move differently. Hunters who survive don't mourn their old steps, they make new ones and live there. The Zir noticed the change. Prey was not dying the right way. Prey was not running. Prey was not doing its part in the old ceremony where predator sharpens itself by chasing something obvious. Zir fit their legends to the facts the way you fit a knife back into a sheath that has gotten wet and shrunken. Some of them grew angry and made mistakes. Some grew interested and made choices. In the Zir clans that lived on the knife edge where ritual meets need, the story of the human who killed a warlord with nothing but a bad leg and a love letter to a broken drone went like fire in dry grass. The huntresses traced a shape on their gauntlets that meant look again. The young males sharpened their knives in circles that meant not that way, a new way. The elders watched and pretended not to be frightened by the future because elders always pretend that. A message came that wasn't a message. It came wrapped in an old Zir hunting horn laser cut from the tibia of a leviathan from some gravity well where the air is knives. It came in a battered Zir courier pod that burned into a burn-free zone and didn't explode. It came with a piece of hide that held Mark's saying, in a language that had never been turned into human words before. There is a place between our teeth and your throat where something else might fit if we both open our mouths carefully. It was ridiculous and dangerous and someone had killed someone else to let it out of the door. Voss read it 3 times. No way this isn't a trap, she said. It's also not only a trap, Mason said, because you can hear when the lie is stitched to the truth and the thread is new. We can't send a diplomat. They'll smell negotiations and kill her for being prey that talks and not prey that runs. Voss looked at him. We can send a hunter. You saying I speak their language. I'm saying you bleed in their grammar. They chose a place that was not a place, an asteroid that had never been named, in a belt that didn't appear on anybody's maps except those of the people who lived there, which is to say everyone and no one. They came with nothing showing and something hidden. The Zir came with their own kinds of hiding and showing. The meeting platform was a circular plate bolted into the rock, and there was nothing on it but a low table and a pile of air so still you could hear your own courage moving. She was there waiting when he stepped out of the shuttle. She was tall for a huntress, not because her bones were longer, but because her stance kept reaching. Her armor wasn't ornate, but the etching followed the shape of her body the way rivers write their names in canyons. Her mask had a crest like the one on the woman he had killed. Not the same, of course, but a blood rhyme. "Mason hail," she said, and the translator in his collar made her voice into a twilight room voice, a hunter's voice soft for the thing it wants not to scare. "Huntress," he said. He didn't give rank because they do not care about the same ranks you do when you are a human. He didn't bow, he didn't puff his chest. He stood like someone who has learned to be exactly as big as he is. "I am called Salith," she said. "I do not place your noises correctly. Your name sounds of rocks." "Rocks hold the ground together," he said. "That is why I came," she said, and a second shape passed under her words that humans might call humor if you were generous, and if you understood that humor is a way of not biting someone you might have to bite later. There were no gifts because gifts are traps even when they are not. There was only food. Food is a better gift because food requires you to admit you are mortal. She set out dried flesh of something that had walked in winds that cut flesh if you let them, and he set out human bread that had been braided by a machine that remembered the hands of the grandmother that taught it. They ate each other's food without comment. In the bloodless world of diplomacy, chewing can be the most honest sound a body makes. "You kill like a hunter who knows he dies anyway," Salith said at last. "I kill because someone needs me alive," Mason said. "When we hunt, the prey gives us its fear and we give it a good death," she said. "You refuse that gift from us and give us another. You give us meaning." "You can have both," he said softly, "meaning and pain." She tipped her mask. "I heard your voice from the throat of a dead sister." "She said a thing," he said, and waited to be told he was unworthy to repeat it. Salith's head angled with something that might have been sorrow. She had vowed not to couple until she found prey that woke her blood in the right way. It is an old vow, not common, not safe. She found it and died. That is a good ending. The next one is yours. "Is this where you tell me the trap closes?" he asked, not unkindly. "Is this where you ask me to leave my teeth at the door?" she asked in the same tone. They did neither. Instead, they made a map. Not a map of space, which is too big, a map of rules. If your group hunts here, ours bites there. If yours takes from this river, ours drinks from that well. If you break it, we don't send a message, we send someone's head. If we break it, you come at us with all of it and we do not sing songs after. The kind of map you make when you can't have peace but you don't want war to waste the good meat. It was a strange kindness. It tasted like iron and like hope. They signed it by cutting the same small line in their wrists and letting their blood fall together and evaporate on the hot rock before it could mingle. The ritual was absurd and unnecessary and perfect. There are things that happen in the places you make for them. That map made a place. The Zir who wanted the old hunts got angry at the new map and did small murder to the huntresses who drew it. They did it in a careful way, with poison that looked like honor. The humans who wanted simple enemies tried to use the map to surprise the Zir in an unguarded river and found themselves neck-deep in a spear wall built from old grudges. People died. People learned. People adjusted the map. That is what maps are for. Mason became a letter. The map used to write sentences nobody knew how to read until they saw them. He hunted Zir raiding parties that insisted on hunting refugee lines. He inserted human physicians into the wake of a hunt to stitch what the hunt had opened. And he watched Zir mothers not stab those physicians and not bless them either, because blessing is a human hobby, and the Zir save such words for knives and storms. He fought Zir males who came at him like mountains with knees. He dueled a spear captain on a cliff of cooled lava while the sky flashed electric like thoughts. He lost a finger, and in return, the spear captain lost the illusions that had let him sleep. They parted with a nod that owned everything they had chosen not to do to each other. Salith hunted with him sometimes. Not often, often enough. Their partnership was not trust and not friendship, and not the thing the first huntress had crooked into the translator on that dish. It was something older. The kind of pact born in riverbed mud when two animals realize there is a bigger animal behind them. She taught him how to listen for the change in the wind when a Zir warband breaks formation into ceremony, when the hunt becomes the dance, and the dance heralds the killing the way thunder is the drummer for lightning. He taught her how to hear the way a human desperate enough to try something stupid breathes before he does it. She showed him how Zir move when they are ashamed, and when they are proud, and how similar those movements actually are. He showed her how humans grieve with their bodies, and how grief sometimes is the fuel and sometimes is the break. Once, in the ruins of a Zir training cradle burned to its bones by a human strike done clean and cruel, they found hatchlings hiding under the floor, their masks still soft cartilage, not yet ossified into things that can stop a spear. Mason's hand went to his knife without thinking, because a plan is just the old story trying to protect you from being surprised. Salith's hand went to his wrist and closed there, and she didn't have to say anything. He told his hand a new story and changed its mind. They pulled the hatchlings out and gave them water from a human bladder bag and a strip of sugar from the medchist. And Salith spoke to them in fast syllables that made their spines loosen a little. Then they set them on a path toward a Zir enclave that would take them in. At the mouth of the ruined cradle, one hatchling turned and looked at Mason with eyes that had seen only hunters and found something that was not quite that and did not know a word for it. "They will sing of this," Salith said. "Humans don't sing," he said. "Liar," she said, and there was the thing under humor again, the thing with teeth and mercy. Sometimes the map held, sometimes it didn't. There were places where the Zir could not stop being themselves and didn't want to, and places where humans couldn't either. It came to a head above Vespera, a station hung in the dark like a beaded earring. The Zir had been forced to pull ships from the line to deal with a famine among the high clans, and there was a rumor that their ritual core had cracked, which is to say they could not decide what story they were inside anymore. Human analysts got drunk on that rumor and wrote battle plans that took the night sky for granted. The Zir rallied anyway. They do that. They do not break all at once. They never do. They bend into their own shape and become the kind of hard that hurts hands. The battle tight around Vespera was a throat made of metal closing. You could see it in the tactical, arcs drawing in, gleams turning to hooks. The valiant dawn cut across the field like a wolf that knows where the deer will step. Voss had grown lean with victory and loss and carried both with the same economy. "We hold the line," she said on the open ship, and when she said we, the hull leaned. Zir boarding rigs punched into Vespera like nails driven by gods who hated jewelry. Teams poured in, their small ones like knives, their big ones like hammers. Mason went across on a cable along with 5 others who had learned a lot of the same lessons. They came in hot to a ring corridor full of red light and the smell of cooked air. There was a Zir line across the passage, a bristle of spears peeking under shields. They were singing in the way drills are songs. The fight was ugly. Most good fights are. There was nothing elegant about pushing on a shield until the edges cut you, and then dropping to drive your blade into the soft gap at ankle height, and then rolling under a spear point you couldn't see. There was a human behind him, Billy, with the black hair and the calm smile, and she went down and said, "Oh," like someone seeing a long-lost friend, and Mason couldn't save her because saving is a math problem you cannot always make add up. He took her tags and gave them the small kiss his grandmother had taught him, though he had told everyone he didn't believe in such things. The lie felt friendly between his teeth. He kept moving. The boarding line failed not because of one hero, but because of 100 small refusals to die in a convenient order. The Zir fell back, and then broke left in a way they wanted to look tactical but looked like fear, if you knew how to listen to feet. Mason followed hard and narrow. The corridor opened into a bay where cargo pods were stacked in columns that made the space feel like a canyon. Zir moved in the verticals like water. He and his team learned to be rock. A male with a crest scar, which among them means I have been lucky and I think it is skill, came at him in a long slash that would have looked beautiful in a training hall. Mason cut his knee. Beauty is for the afterward. Salith found him in that canyon with her spear over her shoulder like a farmer's tool, as if the battle were a field she meant to plow. There was blood on her mask in a chevron pattern that said I have bitten one who mattered. You travel slow today, she said. Legs complaining, he said, and grinned because they were alive. Tell it to learn to hunt, she said, and knocked a spear out of the air with the wood of her own and set her foot on a Zir male's chest without looking down, pinning him there like a taxidermist's idea. The battle lasted 19 hours in human counting and something that involved a smell in Zir counting. At the end of it, Vespera was a ruin that still worked and the Zir task force had learned to be somewhere else. The map gained a new line, no boarding of rings that house nurseries. It was a ridiculous rule in a war. It held. Sometimes ridiculous is the only kind of true. There were quiet days after. Not many. Enough to remember that the quiet exists. Mason mended nets whose job it was to keep dust out of machine lungs, and talked to a kid from Luna who'd never seen rain, and taught him how to tie a knot his grandmother could have tied in a storm with a hand on a boat, and an eye on a wave that wanted to be killed. He sat with Captain Voss as she wrote letters to fathers and wives and sons, and when she ran out of words, he gave her the ones that were just hands. At the edge of an unnamed system where the ice on the world below shone a cold blue and the air around the ships crackled with the ion hiss that means be careful, the Zir came to end the map. Not Salith, others. Clan elders who had never bled for the new rules only ached under them. They sent word that they wanted parley. They brought more ships than a parley needs. They set their shields to the pitch that means we are smiling and our teeth are out. Voss saw it. So did Mason. So did everyone who wasn't dead. We back out, said a young officer whose hand lived on the throttle and whose heart lived where hands live. We go through, said Voss, not as a correction but as a map. We've backed out enough for a century. The fight that followed didn't start when the first gun spoke. It started when Salith's clan emblem lit on the scope and Mason said, she wouldn't, and someone else said, she would've, and they've hung in the air like a sword suspended by a long hair. Open a line, Mason said. This is not the time, the comms chief said, and he was right in the way a schoolteacher is right. Voss said, it's exactly the time and tapped the key. The line opened like a mouth. Salith appeared not as a face but as a column of heat and then as herself, which means the system had decided to be generous. Her mask was off. Her face was not ugly and not beautiful. It was a tool, it was a place. You came, she said. Of course, Mason said. They break the map, they call me traitor, she said, and her mouth did something that might have been a smile and might have been the memory of one. They'll try to kill you for it, he said. They already did, she said without drama. She turned her head then slightly. The image stuttered, compressing pixels, and in the far third of the field Mason saw the figure beyond her, the elder with the old knife eyes and the bone crest that had known hands rubbing it for longer than most wars last. He was not listening, or he was listening and didn't like what he heard and had decided to make a different song. Mason, Voss said softly in his ear. We have 33 seconds. He could make a speech. He could tell a story. He could offer a trade or call a bluff or pull a knife on the line. He did none of those things because they were not what hunters do when the wind shifts. He said 8 words to Salith in the Zir hunter cant she had taught him in a corridor that smelled of cooked air and iron. The words that mean you take the left antler, either right. Her eyes flashed with something that was not surprise and not relief. Yes, she said. The elder moved. The ships moved. The map tore in 3 places and tried to mend itself and failed. The first volley came across like a glittering net. The valiant Dawn went forward into it and shed pieces of itself that it would miss but did not need to live. A Zir cutter tried to do the dental work of ramming. Mason watched Salith's spear vessel slide under it and take its belly open as if gutting a fish on a river rock. Boarding actions are where you see what metal a species hangs its heart on. The Zir came like stars falling, hot and certain and full of old songs. Humans met them like weather, not beautiful, not planned, just there and hard to outlast. Salith fought like a remembrance, every move a repetition of something that had worked enough times that you kept it and made it yours. Mason fought like a possibility, every move a question he dared the world to answer. An elder's bodyguard came down a corridor at a run that had killed 100 prey. Mason stepped into the run and broke it with the same economy he used to fold a blanket so it would slide into the ruck exactly right. When it was done, he held his knife and the bodyguard didn't. He looked down at the knife and realized it wasn't his. It was Salith's, the one with the notch where a hatchling's teeth had tested it once. He'd lost his own in a tangle and picked up hers without thinking because sometimes the pack is real. Salith reached the elder in a chamber that had never been meant to see blood. He was the past in a room that wanted the future. He lifted his spear like a promise. She lowered her head. Mason came in on the other side, on the right antler. The elder saw both of them and realized in that single perfect heartbeat that the story had outrun him. He died well, not because heroes are owed good endings, because he made a choice to die in the shape he loved. They made his death mean something else. That is a kind of mercy. After that, the fight wasn't a fight. It was repair. It was the part where you pick up what has fallen and decide what you keep. Some Zir ships turned away. Some turned their spear points down in salute and then left, which is the Zir way of saying I do not forgive you, but I will not ruin you today. Some humans who had lost too many in rooms without windows shouted things on the open ship that made no one proud. Voss shut the line quietly and does not remember doing it. The valiant Dawn coasted like something tired and satisfied and held together by duty and bolts. Salith and Mason met in a place that was not a place, a maintenance bay where the air still smelled of the elder's blood, which is just meat when you forget to sing about it. She stood with her spear butt planted between her feet. He stood with her knife in his hand and wiped it on his sleeve and offered it, handle first. She took it and touched the blade to her lips and then his forehead, a gesture he would later learn was a childish thing in Zir culture, then chose to keep. You will make more enemies, she said. I always do, he said. You too. Good, she said. We should never run out. They did not promise anything. They did not confess anything. They did not kiss. Humans make stories of such things. They are not wrong, but they are not always right. They simply stood in a circle of quiet in the middle of a mess and made that quiet theirs. The map held after. Not forever. Long enough for new maps to grow out of it, the way new flesh grows over old wounds when you don't pick at them. Trade routes appeared that had nothing to do with meat. Trade in stories and salvage and tricks and cures. A human brewer taught a Zir fermentation ritual in exchange for a spear dance done slow, and both of them cried over the parts they couldn't do right for the other's god. A huntress who had vowed not to couple until she found prey worthy changed her vow to mean hunt alongside and confused the elders enough to keep them silent until they died in their sleep. A human boy born on a ship learned to listen for the change in a Zir wind and saved his crew by closing the right door at the right time. Mason kept hunting, not because he loved killing. He didn't. He did not love it any more than a carpenter loves splinters. He loved what happened when killing was done right, the spaces it saved, the children who got to keep their strange thin laughter, the time it bought for smarter people to make smarter things. He went where the map creaked. He stood where it tore. He stitched with thread made of stubborn and humor. Sometimes it held, sometimes it didn't. He learned the humility of anyone who builds on a moving ground and calls it grace. Years after Kestrel Roman IV ground its teeth clean and slept under new skies, he returned. Not because ghosts dragged him, but because you should visit the place you almost died to tell it the news. The tower lay like a jaw with broken teeth. The dish was a torn ear listening to nothing. He climbed anyway. His leg complained. He told it to listen to the wind and be quiet. At the top, he let the storm touch his face. It was a kinder storm now, less iron, more rain. There was a sound behind him that didn't belong to the storm. He turned. Salith stood on the ladder below, one hand on the rung, the other on her spear, the crest of her mask throwing a shadow like a sail. She climbed without hurry. "This place is a song," she said. "It's where I bled into a new story," he said. "Where my sister ended," she said, and her mouth was not cruel or sweet, just remembering. "She gave me a gift," he said. "She gave me one also," Salith said. She stepped up beside him and set the spear down and looked out over the re-softened plain. "A vow has many ends. Sometimes it ends in death, sometimes in a different vow. Sometimes, and now the thing under humor showed its teeth that were not made for eating, it ends in a child." He looked at her, felt the ground tilt, then settle. He imagined a small thing with a mask too big for its face, a run that learned to be both precise and foolish, a laugh that found the same pitch in two different throats. He didn't say anything. He had learned that silence can be language. "I will show you their first hunt," Salith said after a time, "if your leg can move that fast." "My leg doesn't hunt," he said. "I do." "And what are you?" she asked, turning her head just enough that a human might have called it a smile. "Stubborn," he said. "Good," she said. They climbed down into the warmed air as thunder walked away across new hills. The sand took their steps and did not argue with them. Back aboard the valiant Dawn, older now, patchwork and proud, Captain Voss wrote fewer letters and more beginnings. The fleet wore the look of a people inventing peacetime on the fly without trusting it not to bite. There were memorials that were quiet, the kind you can carry in your pocket and take out to look at when you feel poor, the kind that do not make speech out of sorrow but work. A crewman painted a small figure of a huntress on the bulkhead by the mess door in a place everybody tapped as they went in, the way sailors do with saints they aren't sure they believe in. Mason ate, ship bread and jerked meat of something that had been dangerous once, and drank thin coffee that tasted like patience. He watched a deckhand patch a tear in a pressure suit with the grace of a surgeon. He listened to a child's voice over shipnet teaching someone 3 decks down a song about washing your hands to the beat of an old earth pop hit. He slept in a rack that had held 100 tired bodies before his and would hold 100 after. He dreamed less of blood and more of maps. War had not ended. It had changed its clothes. But there were places now where children could hunt small, bright animals and laugh when they failed. And there were markets where Zir sold human tools and humans sold stories, and nobody called it betrayal. There were corners of the galaxy where the old death songs sounded, yes, but there were more corners where they sounded different. The note had shifted. A hunter can hear such things. He did. He smiled and did not mention it because you don't brag to the wind. On a day that was not a day because the ship clocks had fallen out of love with the concept, the valiant Dawn came in hot to the rim of a small world whose equator wore a necklace of ragtag habitats. A Zir vessel of a clan nobody liked had decided to remind the world it existed by forgetting the map. They took children. They bit without hunger. They tried to taste fear and felt nothing because their tongues were old and dead. The Dawn sang its engines and told them the old story with new words. Mason led a small group hard and fast into the shadow of a warehouse that pretended not to be a prison. He found a room with tall bars and young eyes that did not blink, and a woman from Gambia whose mouth had the strength to be kind anyway. He cut the locks. He handed out water. He picked up one child who would not move and put her on his hip, where his missing finger fit into the soft of her side like a promise he could keep. Salith covered the door. When it was done, and the children were on the dawn and the air tasted like something someone had cleaned on purpose, Mason sat with his back against a wall that had never been anyone's home and let his muscles tell him their opinions. Salith stood over him and tilted her head in the way that meant, "I am not worried about you, but I will admit I am interested in whether you live. You carry them as if you were made for it," she said. "I am," he said, his voice rough. "We are." "And we?" she asked, softly this time, and bent to touch the place on his ribs where an old burn had taught him not to need that piece of himself. "You are hunters," he said, "like us." "Not like," she said. "With." He nodded. He let himself close his eyes for 3 breaths, and when he opened them the light in the room had turned a kinder color because the ship had shifted onto a different day, and someone had put a cup of broth in his hand, and the child with the small hand on his side slept with her mouth open and trusted him with her soft breathing. Later, on the hangar deck, with the cargo nets furled like sails on a ship long dead and resurrected into a different sea, Mason looked out at space and thought it looked back. The galaxy was indifferent to stories. It was rocks and fire and mathematics too big to worship. But it heard. It always heard. It heard footsteps and the drum they made, and it learned. It had learned a new beat. It had learned that prey is a word that means nothing in the mouth of the right animal. The storms on Kestrel Roman 4 still rise some evenings and lay out red dust in sheets so fine you could use them to cover sleeping children. The towers still tip their broken ears to listen. But out there now, somewhere under those sheets, small footsteps practice the old run and the new one. And above, in the ships that cross like thin white scars against the deep, hunters keep their vows, old and new, and write maps in blood and mercy. Humanity did not become the strongest thing. It did not need to. It became the thing that would not stop. The thing that held its breath under the black water and waited for the right air. The thing that made a meal out of stubborn and shared it around until nobody was hungry enough to do something foolish. It became the story other species tell by firelight when the young ones ask, "How do we live?" And the old ones tilt their heads and let the silence stretch and then say, "Like that." When Mason Hale is old enough to laugh without coughing and has scars he can no longer name out loud, he will sit on a crate on a deck that hums like a content animal and watch a small figure run with a spear that is too big for them and learn how to miss without dying. He will hear Captain Voss speak low over shipnet in a voice gone softer with the years and harder with them too, and he will tap the painted huntress on the bulkhead with his knuckles as he walks past, because rituals are tools. He will meet Salith's gaze across a room full of people who think they understand war and who don't yet, and he will feel that bright, terrible, wonderful thing open in his chest that means we made a thing that might last long enough to matter. He will stand. He will do the small jobs in front of him because the small jobs are the only way the big story stays true. He will sharpen a knife that has cut rope and bread and flesh and lies, and he will set it down and not need it. He will teach a child to listen for the difference between a hunter's foot and a frightened one, and tell her that both deserve water and sleep. He will sleep. He will wake. He will keep going. And that day, the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY sci-fi tales. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.